Welcome to The Long Way Home, a 5-part limited series that journeys into the heart of substance use disorders and recovery. With a focus on women, people in recovery, vulnerable communities, and those who have traveled the long way home, we explore how addiction uniquely impacts pregnant people, mothers, adolescents, and young adults. Through conversations with leading experts, lawmakers, and people in recovery, we examine the intersection of addiction, the criminal legal system, systemic neglect, and the enduring effects of colonization. We center the right to recovery, recognizing it as a complex, lifelong process that deserves time, attention, and resources. This series is a space for truth telling, learning, and imagining a more just and supportive path home. In this 4th episode of The Long Way Home, we examine the collateral consequences of drug use and incarceration with Regina LaBelle and Suzula Bidon. Thank you very much, Suzula and Regina, for joining me in this special episode as part of our new series, a very important series, The Long Way Home, and a Tagged for Life, Collateral Consequences of Drug Use and Incarceration. In this episode with you, Suzula, and Regina LaBelle. I'd like to start off with you, Regina. Regina, if you can discuss the intersection of criminalization, drug use, and addiction, what role does the criminalization of drug use play in the experience of drug use and addiction?
Thanks so much for having us on this podcast to discuss this issue. So they're inextricably linked because drugs are illegal in the United States. Underage alcohol use, cannabis is legal in over half the states now. But for decades we have had an approach that I was thinking about this morning. People may, over 60% of people who are in jails have a substance use disorder and or a mental health condition. So they come into the jail or a prison with a lot of preconditions, and they leave with even more challenges to improving health outcomes as well as their social status. So they are inextricably linked because of the nation's traditional approach that we've had, where we've thought that we could punish substance use disorder out of people. And fortunately, we are learning more about that. We're making efforts to divert people away who have substance use disorder away from jails and prisons, and then providing them with treatment. But it's still, we fall really short, and there are still too many collateral consequences that people face when they leave a jail or prison with a drug conviction.
If I could follow up on that, Regina, would you say as well that this history, it reminds me of something that Victoria North said years ago, that this is a country, the United States, that seeks to solve important problems through criminalization rather than other kinds of means. It seems to me that there's also a lens through this that is also racialized and an overlooked lens that involves women too. Could you just touch on that a little bit?
Sure. So certainly, a lot of people who, if you're a family member who's been affected by substance use, if you're in a community that has perhaps, used to be open air drug markets, you want solutions to take the problem away, And if we look at substance use as a moral issue, which we have for a really long time, substance use disorder, that then we have a quick and easy solution, which is to lock them up. And also, the racialization is clearly present. I've seen over time the way that The way the opioid epidemic, which struck primarily white communities in the United States initially, how different the approach was than when we had the crack cocaine epidemic, which was primarily in Black urban areas around the country. The differences are stark. We certainly have learned a lot more about, the science of addiction since then, but you can't overlook the racial overtones that have occurred over time. And Washington D.C., though, in a contrary way, if you split Washington D.C. down the middle, the overdose death rates in the eastern part of the city, east of the Anacostia River, are astronomical numbers versus the western part of the city, which is the white part of the city. And that's due to fentanyl, and which is traditionally linked to heroin use. So we can't overlook the racial elements, and also that search for quick and easy answers to really complex issues.
Thank you so much for that. And it strikes me that, the US with this carceral approach, it incarcerates more women than any other country in the world, more than Russia, China, Thailand, Mexico combined. And it's this overlooked aspect. And I want to turn to Suzula. Thank you so much for being with us. And in particular, you have a really important perspective to share, and you've been sharing it with others. And I appreciate your being here. And in this conversation that we're going to have, it's about your own personal experiences and the consequences that have come with the criminalization of drug use. Can you share your story and how criminalization impacted your life in recovery?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Michelle. It's an honor to be on this podcast. So, how did the criminal legal system and incarceration affect me? In 2005, I was addicted to methamphetamine, and I made the mistake of sending small amounts to a friend across state lines through the mail at his request. After about 3 months of doing that intermittently, there was a concealed indictment, and I was indicted on one federal felony count of conspiracy to possess with intent to distribute methamphetamine, which comes with a 10-year mandatory minimum. So, just back to your question about women, I think this is so incredibly important, because by incarcerating women, you are taking them out of the home. And if you know I'm sure you do, and if your listeners know anything about adverse childhood experiences, having a parent removed from the home, creates I don't know how many fold, but increases a child's likelihood of susceptibility to bad health, including some such things as substance use disorder. So I guess I'm not sure. Is there something specific that you'd like to know? I did 30 months. I spent a year in federal prison camp, basically Orange is the New Black. And then I got out and relapsed, and was sent back for 18 months for relapsing. And that means just having drugs in my system based on a drug test that I had to take because I was on supervised release. And that's when I had my second epiphany. I had my recovery epiphany in jail when they took me into custody and to decide if I was going to be thrown back in prison. Because I saw the same people to jail, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is a pattern. This is my life. Doesn't matter. Nothing matters. I have to do something about this. And then I went to treatment. I've been in recovery since April 23rd of 2008. Went for my postponed revocation hearing, a different judge. The jurisdiction had been moved to Minnesota. And he is the one who said that I had not learned my lesson, and I needed 18 months in the maximum security facility for women. And that's when I, like I said, had my second epiphany, where this is on the record, but in my head, I thought, you know what? No, you do not get to take away 18 months of my life, because I have what you have decided is an illegal disease. So I did my
Thank
18 months, 15 was good time, and then got out and became a lawyer, or went to law school and became a lawyer.
Suzula, thank you so much for sharing that. And I know that you've been interviewed and you've written about this. You've written faced or been quoted with saying, faced with such severe consequences, anyone without the disease of addiction would have been able to stop using drugs, and that you could. And you said that you served a year in prison, got out, and relapsed. You've written about this, you've talked about this, you've talked about begging for help, and then thanks to a public defender, you were allowed to go to treatment. Um, and that was more than 9 years ago, and you've been in recovery ever since. Thank you so much for sharing because so many people don't hear the story of women and what women go through. And you've mentioned what it means when women are taken away from our society, from our communities, from our neighborhoods, and treated as pariahs. You know, men get this sense of forgiveness, even from presidential platforms. What happens with men who are incarcerated is given voice. Famously, when President Obama began uh, turning attention to carcerality, Eric Holder gave a speech before the American Bar Association mentioning men and disparate sentencing. He didn't mention women, and I think he's a great person and was a great attorney general. But in that speech before the ABA, women were not a part of what was imagined or thought about in terms of a mass incarcerated population behind bars in the United States. And then President Obama gave a talk before the NAACP shortly after that. And again, women were an afterthought. They really weren't thought of. But we know that some of the same dramatic kind of disparities happen with women. And when you mention what happens with children, and I ask you to maybe touch on that a little bit more, Kristen Turney, who's a sociologist at the University of California, Irvine, studies uh, children of parents who are incarcerated. And what her research reveals is that children of incarcerated parents fare worse than children who've experienced a parent's death and fare worse than children who've gone through parents' divorce. And it's been so significant that even Sesame Street has now created a Muppet, a puppet named Alex. And Alex has a parent that is incarcerated to try to give voice for children who also suffer. And I wonder if you might touch on that just a little bit more.
Sure. I just know I've studied trauma a lot. I teach a yoga class that's trauma sensitive. And so when I think about a young child whose mother and or father are ripped from the home, they're put into perhaps the family regulation system, child protective services, and gone to foster care. I mean, that's a huge fork in the road for these kids. And especially now with most facilities, most incarceral facilities, they are now making it so that you can't have touch visits. You can only have like through a video screen. And we know touch is so incredibly important for children and parents. And so I think the other piece of that, you mentioned how it's worse than a death of a parent, divorce. It's because of the shame factor and the stigma factor. To have to be a child growing up with all the stress of not having one or both parents in the home and dealing with that, and then also having to explain, yeah, my parents are in prison. I mean, it's the best recipe I can think of to create future people that struggle with substance use disorders, health conditions, and incarceration, frankly.
I have a question for you both, but just one more, Suzula, before I turn back to both of you. And that is a question about the persisting types of social consequences or legal consequences that I think many people may not understand. I'd say that part of my learning is through my own research, but serving on a board that focused on women who experienced incarceration. And understanding and seeing firsthand just the ways in which women who are incarcerated are treated, which people don't pay attention to, what it means if you have breast cancer behind bars, cervical cancer, just the shaming if you even need ice, how salt might be put in the ice or soap detergent, because heavens forbid women be able to get the chance to chew on ice in Arizona where it's very, very hot. But it seems that there are consequences that also linger after release, even if you've dotted every I, crossed every T, been the best citizen possible. I think that there's a lack of understanding of what it's like to then be in society after having experienced time incarcerated. Could you speak to that?
Sure. So there's the NICCC dot National Reentry Resource Center.org, and they have a comprehensive state by state as well as federal and U.S. territories system of all of the collateral consequences of a conviction. I think it's been a while, but the last time I checked, there were more than 144,000. Everything from you can't serve as a county treasurer to you can't get a job in X, Y, or Z profession. So it's just such a huge, huge weight. And when you think about some of these women who are coming out, who have been locked up for 5, 10, 15 years, they've never seen a cell phone. They don't know how to use the internet, and they have no money, no connections. We need to create such a robust community reentry network for those people, because otherwise the likelihood of them going back is so great, in part because it feels safe, because they've been institutionalized. And I'm saying this from my own experience. So yeah, I mean, it's really, I had to jump through many hoops to get my law license, which I now have in 3 jurisdictions. So they didn't make it easy, but I was able to do it.
Yeah, I want to add to that.
Please.
The baggage that you walk in with, and then you get handed 15 more pieces of luggage that you have to carry out with you, and they say you got to carry these for life. And one of them, as Suzula said, are these collateral consequences, which they're numerous. There's some at the federal level and many, many at the state level. A woman in Washington State, Tara Simmons, was a nurse. She was incarcerated. She had a substance use disorder. She's now a state representative in the Washington State Legislature after serving her incarceration. She also went to Seattle University Law School, graduated, took the bar. And the Washington State Bar Association, of which I'm a member at the time, said, no, you can't be a lawyer because of your past substance use and your incarceration. So she appealed, went to the state Supreme Court, and they ruled from the bench that she could indeed have her law license. And there was absolutely no reason for her not to. But those are some of the hoops. There are more bar associations around the country. Suzula has been working with several of them to revise their rules. But that's just one example. And there are many others. And one of the things, if you're incarcerated when you leave, if you have a substance use disorder, you may be connected to treatment. That's happening more often now. But you also, as part of your recovery, need employment and housing. And those, particularly employment, are not made easy. It's not made easy for you to find a job if you have a record, particularly felony convictions. So all of those things are items that, add to the ladder you have to climb in order to sustain your recovery, not return back. There are federal programs. One of them is before the Senate now, the Reentry Act. There are also some local organizations that do things like teach soft skills to people who, upon reentry, because as Suzula said, they may not know, how to use a cell phone yet. So those are, there are a lot of courageous people out there doing the work on a day-to-day basis, but there's a big hill to climb.
Re-entry is difficult. It's very difficult, and even more so when it's a society that's not paying attention to what all of those hurdles represent. And I appreciate the story that you just shared, that both of you just shared, such that even for those who've done the work, gone to law school, which is not easy whatsoever, right? Taking the bar exam, all of those things, and still being denied. So, whether on one end of the scale or the other, many different hurdles to cross. Regina, you've written about the criminalization of addiction and that it isn't working. Prevention and treatment deserve a chance. And I'm quoting here from this article that you wrote, which is posted at Cato Unbound. A good place to start, you say, is by integrating the addiction treatment system into the healthcare system, since substance use disorders have long been considered moral failings requiring a criminal justice response. The healthcare system is ill-equipped to respond effectively to any type of substance use disorder. Can you share a bit more about the theory behind this, that criminalizing addiction isn't working, and that the way in which we need to go is prevention and treatment, and that that's an integration within the healthcare system in order to be successful?
Sure. So the prevention piece, as Suzula said, was really remarkable. Is that we're basically it's a recipe for developing children and into adults who have their own either substance use disorder or other conditions by not looking at the family as a system. When if a parent needs treatment, we separate the parent while they quote unquote get better and take the children out of the picture, when really we need to be thinking about the entire family as a unit, and that's part of prevention. And we focus on prevention often from a perspective as the one-on-one parenting, which is really important. But we also need to focus on the piece of prevention that's about making sure that people have housing, they have employment, and then the substance use piece integrated into the healthcare system. It wasn't until the last decade that we actually had that addiction medicine was recognized as a specialty. That if you wanted treatment, you had to very successful, AA is very successful. You either went to an AA meeting or you found a separate type of treatment system. But really what we need to do is have people who are in the medical community identify someone who might need help and refer them to treatment, or refer them for other services that they may be in need of. So I think for years, addiction has been seen as something that we'll let the criminal justice system take care of it. And clearly, if substance use disorder is a condition that's a recognized medical condition, it's the responsibility of our healthcare community to address that, not just say, we'll just incarcerate someone or arrest them and they'll get better on their own. We know from the neuroscience that that's not what happens. And we know from years of evidence that, people will do better if they are provided these other employment services, jobs, or housing services, as well as counseling that they may need to enter recovery and also to sustain their recovery.
Well, Regina, to the point in the article that you wrote and what you've just said, I quote you here with saying, every day people with opioid use disorder are incarcerated, forced into withdrawal, and denied treatment medications that would prevent abrupt withdrawal and give them a better chance of entering recovery and avoiding overdose. One of the things that we haven't talked about, and I've got other questions for you before I let you go. I could spend a lot of time with you here, is just the cost. How much it costs to society by incarcerating individuals rather than giving them a chance at recovery through medical treatment. In New Jersey, it costs more to incarcerate someone than to send them to Princeton. And it seems to me that economically, and this shouldn't be about numbers, it should be about compassion, about people, about human dignity and human rights. But it seems to me that this makes no sense on many different levels, including those that are economic. So I want to turn to my last questions here with you, and I really appreciate the time that both of you have given to me for this episode. Regina, in February of this year, you testified before the House Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Health to discuss combating existing and emerging illicit drug threats. In that testimony, you talked about those who are working to overcome addiction and rebuild their lives in recovery. That work requires strong support systems and effective public policies. What are some of the approaches do you think that could take place that would lead us to a better place? And Suzula, I'd ask you the same too. I'll start off with you, Regina, and close out with Suzula on what can take place right now from a federal level, state level, civil society organizations to move this agenda along and to get us to a better place?
Well, I mean, one thing that's happening right now is the House and Senate are considering the appropriations legislation. And the legislation that the president's proposed budget that went to the Hill would have significantly reduced the grant programs we have for people with to prevent, treat, and sustain recovery for people with substance use disorder. And we also know the impact that the One Big Beautiful Bill will have on Medicaid, which will cause, I am incredibly concerned about the impact that kicking, millions of people off of Medicaid will have on our overdose death rates, and as well as just substance use disorder generally. So one thing we can do right now is pay attention to what's happening on the Hill, and make sure that we're sustaining the funding that's needed. This is not something. Again, AA is effective for alcohol use disorder, and it is free, but it is not sufficient. And we need to support people at the local level who do harm reduction programs. They are underfunded. They provide the type of low barrier care that people who may never enter a doctor's office need. So I could go on and on, but I will leave it at that. There's a lot more that we need to do to hold, members of Congress accountable, as well as supporting local community groups that are doing the right thing to help their people in need.
And Suzula, I'll close out with you. What could be done now to help move along a more just, dignified agenda to help individuals with substance use disorders?
One of the things that I've been really excited about for the last 10 years in the SUD space and in the mental health space is peer support, peer recovery support. So I think it would be, for instance, there are people who work for recovery community organizations who have contracts with drug courts, and then people who've been trained in providing peer support go in, and it's voluntary. The people can choose whether or not to work with them. I just think we need to meet people where they are, just like Regina was saying, get off this 12-step mandate. The 12 steps saved my life. And people have different paths to recovery, and shaming them and excluding them because they haven't chosen the 12 steps is to no one any good. So I'm not knocking the 12 steps. I just think we really need to start incorporating, harm reduction, and a lot more community-based services and peers.
I want to thank you both for joining me for this episode and for being part of this very important series. This series that focuses on the long way home, tagged for life, collateral consequences of drug use and incarceration. This particular episode. Thank you so much, Regina. Thank you so much, Suzula. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Take care.
Guests and listeners, thank you for joining us for our special limited series podcast, The Long Way Home. We want to thank our guests. And to our listeners, we thank you for tuning in to learn more about addiction and recovery. For more information about what we discussed today, head to msmagazine.com. This podcast series is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. We are ad-free and reader-supported, so we encourage you to support independent feminist media. Look for us at msmagazine.com for new content and special episode updates. And if you want to reach us to recommend guests for our show or topics that you want to hear about, write to us at ontheissues@msmagazine.com. We want to thank collaborators for this project, including Professor Regina LaBelle. She is the director of the Center on Addiction Policy at the O'Neill Institute for National and Global Health Law at Georgetown Law. She is also a professor of addiction policy at Georgetown, where she is also the founder and director of the Masters of Science in Addiction Policy and Practice program. Our producers for this episode are Roxy Zoll, Oliver Hogue, Allison Whelan, Mariah Lindsay, and our intern is Emerson Panagrahi. We also thank Jennifer Weiss-Wolf. The creative vision behind our work includes art and design by Brandy Phipps, editing by Natalie Hodlin, and we are always grateful to you, our listeners.